Hey, souls and spirits out there. Welcome back to this sacred space that we have created together. I'm so grateful you are here. And today I want to do just an introduction into the goddess Sekhmet from the ancient Egyptian traditions. And she's one of my favorites. And I looked through my closet today, and the only shirt I could find close enough to her energy was my witchy cat shirt that says "Go Away Potion." And I feel like that kind of goes along with her vibe. So today we're going to talk about Sekhmet. And a lot of times I feel like she's really misunderstood. She is the lioness in the ancient Egyptian tradition, or one of the lionesses. She's the blazing eye of the sun, the force that kind of destroys imbalance. She is divine power that can heal disease, she can restore order, and she protects the world. Her name can bring a lot of things about. But she was invoked by healers, and she was a protector of the kings, and she was an immense source of spiritual transformation. So she's a big deal. We're going to explore her story, her history, some sacred texts that she's in, and practical ways that you can go about calling on her in your spiritual work if you so choose to. This is not an attempt to flatten Sekhmet into any kind of, symbol or archetype. She just is. And she's going to be different from every single person. She comes from the living, complex world of ancient Egypt, or Kemet, where divinity was understood through many forces and names and places and powers. Sekhmet is not merely destructive. That's what you hear a lot with her, but she's not merely destructive. She is a goddess of necessary force. She's the heat that cauterizes a wound, the fever that reveals an illness, and she is a big boundary that just says, I'm not taking it anymore. Absolutely not. So Sekhmet's name often translates into the powerful one, or she who is powerful. And the name itself tells us something, that her name, the powerful one, is inherently her nature. The Egyptian kind of image of her, she is typically shown as a woman with the head of a lion. Above her head rests the solar disk, often encircled with the protective cobra, the uraeus. This identifies her with the fierce and royal solar power of Ra, the sun god. The lioness was not a casual choice. In the ancient kind of Nile Valley, lions represented strength and sovereignty and traditional or territorial protection and danger. A lioness hunts. She protects her young. She commands fear. Sekhmet's lioness form expresses a divine force that is alert and uncompromising and difficult to contain if you don't know what you're doing. But her solar disk matters just as much on her lioness head. Sekhmet is not simply rage. She is that solar intensity, that heat, that brilliance, that vitality, purification. And she's the force that can sustain life or scorch the earth. In ancient Egyptian thought, opposites were not always treated as contradictions. A power that brings an illness could also remove it. A goddess who devastates enemies could protect a community. A divine force associated with bloodshed could also defend the cosmic balance Ma'at, which is, remember, if I've said it before, truth and justice and harmony and proper order of things. So Sekhmet belongs to that kind of paradox. She is fierce because the world needs protection. She is dangerous because imbalance has consequences. And she is healing because healing sometimes requires confronting what has been denied. So to understand Sekhmet, we need to understand one of the greatest patterns in kind of Egyptian religion, and that is the Eye of Ra. And the Eye of Ra is not merely an anatomical eye. It was a divine feminine power that extended from the sun god Ra. It could act independently and travel and fight and protect and punish and restore. Different goddesses could embody this power in different places and stories throughout their traditions. But among them were Hathor and Sekhmet and Bastet and Tefnu and Wajet. Those are just the ones I kind of came across, but there are others. The Eye of Ra is fiery and active. It's a feminine force of solar divinity. So when Ra's order is threatened, the eye kind of moves and figures it out. One of Sekhmet's best-known mythic roles appears in the text scholars often refer to as the Book of the Heavenly Cow. Preserved in royal tombs from the New Kingdom, this story is about humanity's rebellion against an aging solar sun god Ra. The people speak against him and plot against his authority. And so Ra kind of consults the other gods, and they all decide to send the Eye of Ra against humanity. So they send out Sekhmet. But Sekhmet is in her Hathor form. So a lot of the stories talk about how she's kind of this triple-headed goddess that we see in other cultures. She is Hathor, she is Sekhmet, she is Bastet. So Hathor is sent in a destructive form. And in many retellings of this fierce manifestation of this energy becomes Sekhmet. She descends upon the rebellious people in her lioness form, slaughtering those who have turned against this cosmic order. She becomes intoxicated with the violence that she's enacting, and her fury grows beyond what Ra and the gods ever intended. And this is one of the central images of Sekhmet, this divine rage unleashed against this disrespect and this disharmony and for the order of sacred life. But the story doesn't end with just the destruction of the world. Ra becomes concerned that the goddess will destroy humanity entirely, and that's not what he wants. So he devises a plan and makes vast quantities of beer mixed with this red ochre, or some versions, this red substance that resembles blood, and pours it across the land. Sekhmet sees this red flood and believes it to be blood. Remember, she is just obsessed with this violence right now. And she drinks this beer that looks like blood. She becomes intoxicated from drinking all of that beer, and her destruction ceases. When she awakens, the overwhelming violence that she had has been completely transformed, and the lioness is pacified and the world survives. And this myth can be read on many levels. It's not simply a story that says, anger is bad or that power must be suppressed. It teaches that divine force must be held within this balance. Unchecked rage can become indiscriminating and not seeing where right and wrong are. Even righteous anger requires containment and wisdom and transformation. The red beer is especially important because it appears in later Egyptian religious festivals, including celebrations connected with Hathor. Intoxication, music, dance, sexuality, celebration, and ritual joy were not necessarily opposite to sacred kind of seriousness. They could be methods of restoring balance and calming this dangerous Eye of Ra energy, or Sekhmet. In this sense, joy is not the opposite of fierce power. It can be what makes fierce power sustainable. So in this story, the goddess who destroys is not defeated by this great weapon. She is transformed through an offering that redirects her energy. Blood becomes beer, fury becomes celebration, and destruction becomes restoration. And I feel like that's kind of a teaching within and of itself, not that we need to go into this blind rage and then drink ourselves stupid, but that things can change, things can shift, and transformation is always possible. Sekhmet was worshipped across ancient Egypt for many centuries. Her presence appears from Old Kingdom onward, and her importance grew especially strong in the Middle and New Kingdoms. She was closely associated with kingship and warfare. Egyptian kings presented themselves as defenders of Egypt's order against chaos and enemies and these foreign threats. Sekhmet was the divine force behind royal victory. In these royal scripts, she could be described as moving from the king in battle and striking enemies with fear and terror. Yet, it would be incomplete to call her only this war goddess. Sekhmet was also deeply associated with disease and healing and epidemic. Ancient Egyptians could understand that illness is a dangerous divine force. If a goddess had the power to send kind of disease out, she could also be appealed to it for protection against these things. Sekhmet was therefore central to medical and ritual healing practices. Her priests were known for their healing roles. The phrase priest of Sekhmet appears in contexts related to medicine and ritual knowledge and protection from illnesses. Egyptian medicine did not divide physical treatment from spiritual practice the way kind of our modern systems do. Remedies, observations, spoken formulas, amulets, and invocations kind of did all the work together. Sekhmet's priests were also specialists in dealing with threatening forces, not just disease, but hostile spirits and displeasure against the gods. So to seek Sekhmet's favor was to seek protection from the very heat and disorder that she could embody herself. One of the most extraordinary historical examples of her worship comes from the reign of Amenhotep III. In the 18th dynasty, hundreds of statues of Sekhmet were created for his mortuary temple complex at Thebes, near modern-day Luxor. These statues show her seated or standing, holding the Ankh, the sign of life, or the Wa scepter, the symbol of power and dominion. When I saw her statues there, she was seated and she had it in her hand and it was, facing outward. And there was hundreds of fragments of these statues and only a few remained actual, the full thing that you could see. But why so many statues? Scholars had suggested that these statues may have been a part of some type of ritual cycle in which Sekhmet was honored daily or at regular intervals. Each statue had a time of day of the year, like every single moment in time basically had a Sekhmet to watch over it. Perhaps to keep her protective and healing powers close while continually pacifying this dangerous aspect of herself. But that sheer number of statues reveals the seriousness of her energy and her worship at that time. She was a major divine presence in royalty, in medicine, and in everyday temple life. Her worship was particularly connected to Memphis, one of ancient Egypt's most important cities at the time. There she was associated with the god Ptah. He is a creator god. He is a patron of artists, and in their stories, Sekhmet was often considered Ptah's consort, and their son was called Nefertum. He had a lotus on top of his head, and he was associated with fragrance and beauty and healing and rebirth. He was considered the beautiful child. And so that family grouping together, I feel like, is kind of revealing as well. Ptah represents creative intelligence or the making of something. Sekhmet represents the powerful protection, purification, and the force behind something. And Nefertum, the child, represents beauty and fragrance and healing and renewal. So we have that, that mother, father, child aspect, the Trinity. But I think it's really interesting in Egyptian culture that we often see this creative energy as masculine in some of these stories, where in everything else that I think of, you think of creativity, you think of, birthing a child, that creative act, you think of that as motherly, maternal, divine feminine. That, to me, that's what, I always just think about. But in a lot of the Egyptian stories, the feminine energy, Sekhmet, was the powerful force behind something. And Ptah, the masculine, was the creative making act. So it's interesting that it's kind of backwards there. We also see it with Geb and Nut. Geb is Mother Earth. Geb, the divine masculine, is the earth, where Nut is the sky goddess. And in all the other cultures, it's different. We hear Mother Earth, we see, Gaia, divine feminine energy, as that creative force of earthly energy. And here it's backwards. So it's just an interesting difference I see here. Sekhmet also appears in many kinds of Egyptian religious material, royal inscriptions, temple texts, funerary texts, healing spells, hymns, and all kinds of things. Like I said, her most famous one is probably her destructive story, the Book of the Heavenly Cow, and copies of this kind of appeared in New Kingdom royal tombs, including the tomb of Tutankhamun and later royal burials. The text describes Ra's withdrawal from the human world after humanity's rebellion and the violent intervention of the Eye of Ra, or Sekhmet. She also appears in pyramid texts, the oldest kind of Egyptian religious texts inscribed inside royal pyramids during the Old Kingdom. She can appear as powerful, fearsome, divine being associated with the king's ascension and his protection against destructive power. In coffin text written on coffins during the Middle Kingdom, divine powers become available in expanded ways beyond just the king alone. Sekhmet's protectiveness and dangerous energies remain important in navigating this afterlife that they believed in, defending against hostile forces going through those doors or the gates in the underworld. She also later appears in funerary and magical translations of materials associated with what we call the Book of the Dead, and through Egyptian text. They don't function as just one big scripture, how we think of some other texts. They are a collection of different spells and hymns and ritual formulas and sacred compositions that have developed over centuries and have been changed over time. One important point is that Egyptian deities were very fluid in their expression. A goddess could be called by different names and even seen merged with another goddess in different things, or appear in a local form tied to a specific temple. Sekhmet could be invoked as Sekhmet Hathor or Sekhmet Bast, and other associations with Mut even, who is another divine goddess. And it just depended on location and period and what the ritual purpose was. And this does not mean that Egyptians were confused. I've had a lot of people say, were they just confused with how many gods and goddesses they had? No, it meant that their theology was expansive and fluid, and divine power could have multiple faces without losing its integrity or identity in their traditions. And Sekhmet and Hathor are among some of the most divine relationships I think that are important to understand. At first glance, you could think of them as opposites. Hathor is associated with love and beauty and dance and pleasure and fertility and intoxication. And Sekhmet is associated with, the battle and fire and wrath and protection, but also healing. But in the Eye of Ra kind of tradition or thought, they can be expressions of that shared divine force. Hathor can become Sekhmet when the solar eye turns fierce. Sekhmet can be pacified into her Hathor mode of joy and sensuality and music and celebration. The goddess does not split into good and bad. Rather, she reveals kind of this spectrum. So here we're back to kind of hermetics that we talked about. There are times when one must protect life with fierce boundaries. And then there are times when one must restore life through music and beauty and pleasure and celebration. And Hathor reminds us that sacredness includes joy. And Sekhmet reminds us that sacredness can include force and power. And a mature spiritual path needs both of these things. For modern practitioners, this relationship can be especially useful if working with Sekhmet feels overwhelming or overly heated. I mean, sometimes I call on her and it's just like, I'm burning up. I mean, her energy is so powerful, and it can become emotionally intense. And Hathoric practices may help create that balance, bringing in music and dance and beauty and gentle offerings and laughter and art and gratitude. It can help balance it, not to suppress Sekhmet's energy, but to honor the mythic rhythm in the fierce power that is returned to this harmony of both of them. Sekhmet is also frequently compared to Bastet, or Bast, another feline goddess. Bast is usually represented as a domestic cat or a woman with a cat's head. I have a beautiful statue I got of her recently. If you can see it, she's very lovely. She is associated with protection and home and fertility again, and music and motherhood and the defense of the household. Like Sekhmet, Bastet can be connected with the Eye of Ra, with this solar protective power. And oftentimes in depictions, you see her, the body of a woman with the head of a cat, and she's holding a basket of kittens. So I think of her as fiercely a protector of children and motherhood in general. And the contrast is often described as, this lion and this house cat. Sekhmet is the wild, blazing, desert-facing, feline, just power. And Bastet is this intimate, domestic, graceful household protector of the feline energy. But both are protectors. Both have this fierce power. The modern tendency to make Bastet soft and Sekhmet harsh is seen a lot. In the ancient Egyptian religion, it's more nuanced than that. Bastet could be fierce, and Sekhmet could also do healing. Both can be protective. Both can express divine feminine solar authority. If Sekhmet guards the outer boundary, the city gate, the battlefield, the threshold against chaos, Bastet guards the inner boundary, the home, the family, the body, our daily lives. Spiritually, you might think of Bastet as the guardian of your sanctuary, of your home, and then Sekhmet as the guardian of your sovereignty. Sekhmet is also closely associated with the goddess Mut, the great mother goddess of Thebes. Mut was a consort of Amun, the mother within this Theban kind of divine triad again. Over time, she could take on these lioness and solar aspects as well. Some forms and titles connect her with Sekhmet, and this is another example of this Egyptian theological kind of layering of everything. Sekhmet's lioness power could be understood through Mut's maternal sovereignty. This mother is not only nurturing, the mother is also protective, and she disciplines and she defends her home. In this relationship, Sekhmet's fierceness is not separated from maternal care. It is maternal care at the point where protection becomes necessary. And for those of you who have experienced a distorted view of spirituality that equates love with this endless tolerance, it's worth remembering that the divine feminine also has claws. And I'll just leave it at that. Sekhmet was not the only lioness goddess in Egypt, though. There was Menhit, whose name can be translated as she who slaughters, often associated with warfare and the Eye of Ra. There was Pakhet, a lioness goddess connected with hunting and the desert kind of margins and the dangerous liminal space between this cultivated land and the wilderness. There was Tefnut, associated with moisture and order and the returning of Eye in some of the kind of cycles of the story. There was Wajet, the cobra goddess of Lower Egypt, another Eye of Ra figure associated with kingship and the royal uraeus. And the point is that not all of these goddesses are interchangeable. They aren't. Each has distinct temples and myths and titles and religions and ritual relationships to them in and of themselves. But they share this familiar resemblance, a fierce feminine power that guards order and protects and confronts chaos head on. And across many cultures, people encounter goddesses of this protective energy. You might compare Sekhmet with figures such as Kali in Hindu traditions, or the Morgan in Irish traditions, or Durga as the demon slayer, or Inanna in some of the powerful and warlike dimensions of her story. But comparison should never become equivalent to each other, if that makes sense. Sekhmet is not Kali with this Egyptian aesthetic attached to her. She's not simply an Egyptian version of the dark goddess. She belongs to her own religion and linguistics and geography and her own historical world. Comparisons can show these shared patterns, but they should not erase the differences between these divine figures. And so what can Sekhmet teach a modern-day practitioner? I think a lot. She teaches that anger can be sacred information. Anger is not always wisdom. It's not always safe to act from. But anger can signal that a boundary has been crossed, a truth has been violated, or an injustice has been just normalized. Sekhmet can ask us, what have you been tolerating that is costing you part of your life force? Where have you called yourself compassionate when you were actually kind of abandoning yourself a bit? Where have you confused peace with silence? Her medicine is not reckless confrontation of these things. Her medicine is a clear perception and right action and the courage to end what must be needed, what no longer serves you, just a nice clear cutoff. Sekhmet also teaches us that healing is not always gentle. Some healing practices soothe, others reveal things. A fever may be uncomfortable, but it signals that a body is responding to an infection. A difficult truth may be painful, but it can interrupt a harmful pattern. This does not mean suffering is automatically meaningful. It does not mean that one should romanticize pain in any way. This means that transformation can involve heat. It can involve grief and anger and an honest assessment of things and a refusal to return to what was destroying you. Third, Sekhmet teaches us disciplined power. Her force must be honored, but not just kind of indulged in. In this myth of the red beer, the world survives because destructive power is redirected. The lesson is, do not let anger become the only conscious thing in the room. And if you work with Sekhmet, let your practice include lots of grounding, lots of accountability, and lots of rest. She is a very high energy being, and it can take a lot out of you. If you feel called to work with Sekhmet spiritually, begin slowly and begin respectfully. You do not need an elaborate altar or expensive statues or some big dramatic initiation. What matters is consistency and sincerity, study, and ethical conduct. A simple Sekhmet altar might include a candle, ideally gold or red or white, warm solar colors, a lioness image or a representation of Sekhmet that you enjoy that feels respectful, some clean water or holy water, incense if it's safe for your space and your body. Fresh flowers are always nice. Breads, fruits, simple food offerings, a small symbol of the sun or fire or an ankh. She has her own images, and if anyone is interested, I can happily share that with you, but it's kind of hard to share on here. If you choose to offer beer or wine or anything because of this mythical association, which is always nice, but remember that alcohol is never spiritually required. You could even use red hibiscus tea or pomegranate juice, berry juice, anything red, because it's a symbolic offering to her stories. And the point is intention, not intoxication. So before beginning, you want to clean your space. You want to make sure everything's clean, the space, the energy, and you might start with something like an invocation. Sekhmet, powerful one, Lioness of the solar eye, guardian of truth and protector of order, I approach you with respect. May I know your strength and your wisdom. May I know your fire with balance and your healing with humility. And just sit quietly. Do not demand signs. Like all things spirituality, do not, come at this demanding something happen. Let this relationship develop over time. You may like to meditate on a solar disk or the image above her head. Ask yourself what in your life needs honest light shined upon it. What boundary needs to be restored? What falsehoods need to be burned away? Then just see what emerges. You can do it once a week, once a day. It's honestly up to you how you want this relationship to progress. There's all kinds of things you can do with Sekhmet. One of my most dramatic stories with her was I was in Egypt. And I had gotten to know her pretty well, but I was always kind of hesitant because she is such a strong, just energetic force. But the first time I was in Egypt, I do not like confrontation in any way. I do not like people coming up to me and saying stuff in an aggressive tone, even if they're not being aggressive. And over there, the way people talk is very energetic and it can almost sound aggressive, which they're not being. But when you walk into places and they have the markets and the people are trying to sell you stuff, they're all in your face and they're, trying to get you to buy these things. And they kept yelling at me and wanting to show me stuff. And a man grabbed my arm and tried to put a bracelet on my wrist. And I just kind of freaked out. I just kept walking and I was trying to be very nice. I didn't want to disrespect anybody, but inside I was freaking out. And we got into the temple and I was just having an emotional mental breakdown because I knew I was going to have to walk through all of those people again. Because to get into the temple we were at, you had to walk through all the vendors. And I knew we were going to have to walk back out through all of them. And I knew that man was going to clock me again and he was going to try to get me to buy something. And I'm not a haggler and you have to haggle over price everything at those markets. And I was a wreck. I was just a panic. I tried to enjoy my visit, and right before we left, I called on Sekhmet and I said, I don't know exactly what I said, but I said, Divine Goddess Sekhmet, I need your help. I need you to build a wall of fire around me. That way, no one can come near me. No one can touch me. Let me walk invisibly kind of through all of these people back to our bus so I don't have to talk to any of them. So I don't have to deal with this. Like, I personally can't handle it. I need your love and your support. Please surround me and let me get back to our bus safely. And I'll tell you what, we walk through the gates of that temple, and every single person in our group, we hadn't talked about it. I hadn't said anything about how freaked out I was or anything. Every single person in our group surrounded me. There was like 20 people in our group, and they surrounded me. They somehow put me in the middle, and the biggest man in our group, he was a big Hawaiian man, he wrapped his arm around me and he just started talking to me. And he walked me all the way to the bus. Everyone was surrounding me. You couldn't see me in the middle of our group. I was completely invisible. And so no one bothered me. And I got on the bus and I was just like, my God, it really works. Like, that was one of the biggest moments for me. And I just said, thank you. I said, thank you so much. Thanks you for your protection and, for helping me when I needed you most. And that was one of the biggest moments that showed me that, oh, this works. Calling on these energies, calling on these divine energies can really work. And I have used her since. I've used her in healing. I use her a lot for protection. Especially if I'm in very uncomfortable situations, she's the person I call on. I'm hoping to talk about spirit guides on here at some point. And in my spiritualist tradition, we believe we have a certain, set of guides and we have our own protection. And I do. I have a protector guide. I actually have 2 spiritual protector guides in my band. But when I am in a very uncomfortable situation, especially I'm not a fan of public things, I call on Sekhmet and I say, clear the room, clear a space, or if I feel unsafe, whatever I think is like here to harm me, don't let it come near me. And she works her magic every single time. I never have to worry when I call on her. So she's incredible. There's so many things you can work with on her, and there's so many different books out there that you can look into. And if anyone has any interest in any of those things, I would be happy to provide that information for you. She is a wonder. She is one of my favorite energies to work with. And so I haven't done this for a minute, so I would like to end with just kind of a short meditation if you so choose. So if you are somewhere where you can get comfortable, please do so. So let's, close your eyes if somewhere you are able. Take some slow, deep breaths and release it. And I want you to imagine yourself standing at the edge of a desert, right as the sun is rising in the sky. The sky is still dark blue, but you see this light right there on the horizon, this golden light. In that light, you start to see an image of a lioness. She's perfectly still. She does not need to prove her strength. She just is. And above her slowly rises the sun. You do not fear her. You approach her with respect. Allow it to be a simple exchange. Ask herself or you, what must I protect? Then ask, what must I release? And then finally ask, how can my power serve life itself? I want you to continue to breathe in and out as is comfortable and see what Sekhmet has to say. Then see her slowly turn towards the rising sun as the sun rises in the sky, you feel that warmth consuming you, clarifying you. Let that light fill your chest. May you have the courage to speak truth. May you have the wisdom to release what does not serve. May you have the strength to protect what is sacred. And may your power be guided by Ma'at. Sekhmet, powerful one, may your fire bring clarity. Sekhmet, lioness, may your strength protect life. Sekhmet, healer and guardian, may your presence teach us how to carry power with wisdom. And slowly open your eyes if you close them. So thank you so much for joining me today on this little introduction about Sekhmet. I'm sure I'll talk about her sometime again. If this episode resonates with you, you might want to spend this next week reflecting on a single question. Where is my sacred boundary asking to be restored? And if you have any questions about Sekhmet or anything we talked about today, please feel free to comment under wherever you're listening or email me at soulandspirit.life. And if you have any recommendations on anything for me to talk about, please do the same. So until next time, may your path be protected, your heart be clear, and your inner fire serve what is true. I'll see you soon.